There we go. Yes. They say the first 2 minutes are the most critical when you're giving a speech. So hopefully that worked for you. So I want to build a little bit on what Julian laid out and kind of set us up for talking about culture. I have a lot of content that I want to share with you. So at the end of this speech, I have a QR code, and you can use that QR code to get a copy of this presentation, as well as there are 2 online courses that follow this material and some workbooks, all of it free for you. So this is open source. So as I go quickly, please know that you're going to have access to all kinds of support materials afterwards, okay? So what I want to talk about is I want to talk about outthinking the competition. If we look at successful business innovators, many of them, almost all of them, talk about this idea of thinking faster than your competition. This is Ray Kroc. He's the founder of McDonald's, and he said, my attitude was that competition can try to copy my style, but they can't read my mind, so I'll leave them 1.5 miles behind. So let's think about your advantages as coming from producing a flow of ideas that overwhelm your competition, that keep you ahead of your competition. Now, an idea that your competitors can copy quickly is less valuable than one in which they take a long time to copy. So if we look at successful business innovators and how they talk, what we see is they're looking for a certain type of idea, not just any idea, but the kind of idea that your competitors will avoid copying. My favorite phrasing of what they're looking for is that of Gandhi. He said, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win. So what he's describing here is we want to create an intentional sequence where you introduce an idea in the market and your competitors, instead of copying you quickly, they ignore you and they laugh at you, so that by the time that they wake up and say, wait a second, that idea is going to work, it's too late, you've already won. Disruptive innovation, which Julian referred to and the minister referred to, is a permutation of this. If you're familiar with blue ocean strategy, it's a permutation of this. 2,500 years ago, Sun Tzu wrote The Art of War. He had a term called taking whole. It's another permutation of this. I believe this is one strategic concept. It's been around for millennia. We've just called it different things over the years. And for our time together, I invite you to call it the fourth option. I think it's a helpful metaphor because it says this is what the beginning of innovation looks like. There's a point at which others stop thinking. When they say, I've been in this business for 30 years, and what we need to do is 1, 2, 3. Or I've solved this problem before. What you need to do is A, B, C. What that means is they've stopped looking for new options. And you as an innovator, what you do is you identify those moments where others aren't thinking, and you look beyond that for a fourth option. Let me give you an example of a fourth option. We're going to talk about business, but let's go back in time and let's talk about horse racing. In ancient times in China, the way that wealthy people entertained themselves is they'd race horses. There was one general who was frustrated because he kept losing to the prince. So he asked an advisor for help, and the advisor observed the matches, and he said, this is a very simple game. You basically race 3 sets of horses, your fastest, your medium, your slowest, as a result of which there are 3 ways to win this game. You need better horses, you need better riders, or you need to provide better care and feeding. And your problem, Mr. General, is that since the prince has more money, he can buy better horses, hire better riders, and provide better care and feeding. So based off of these 3 things, what today we would call key success factors, you're going to lose every time. But I see a fourth option. I want you to challenge the prince to one last competition. We'll do it a week from Thursday. I want you to invite the entire town and all your family, all your friends, really raise the stakes. Now, the general's a little nervous about this, but he does as his advisor says, and a week from Thursday, this is like the World Cup of horse racing. The town is empty, everyone's in the stadiums, excited about the race, it's about to start, and the drums roll, indicating everyone should go quiet. And the sequence begins. The prince prepares his best horses, and they go up to the gate. The general prepares his best horses, and the advisor says, wait. If you play the way they expect you to play, you know what the outcome will be. To change the outcome, I want you to change the way you play the game. I want you to race your slowest horses first. And that changes the outcome of the game. That is the pattern of innovation, of all breakthroughs in strategy. This is not working. Julian talked about the Fosbury flop. Same pattern. Before 1968, there were 3 ways that people went over high bars, all forward techniques. And then Dick Fosbury turned his back on that tradition. He wins the Olympics. It takes the competition 8 years to copy him. But what I'd like to pull out of that story is, why did it happen in 1968? It wasn't because of new technology. The technology that makes this strategy possible, which is simply putting pads on the other side of high bars, that was already being laid out 15 years before. So why didn't someone do this 4 years before, 8 years before, 12 years, at least at the international level? So I'm going to propose to you, it's not the technology that's going to slow down the pace of innovation. It's rather your understanding of the concepts around technology and what that informs about how you behave. So it's not about learning the technologies, it is about adapting quickly to what is possible around those technologies. And it's not till the concept is named, not till we have the Fosbury flop. You can't, before the term Fosbury flop, you can't call up a coach and say, can you teach me the Fosbury flop? You can't find a book on this Fosbury flop. So I'm going to pose here is your innovation comes from your thinking. Your thinking is informed by your language. So to innovate ahead of your competition, you need to adopt the emerging languages and manage the conversations that you have. And there isn't just one technology that we're facing. There are multiple technologies that we're facing that are opening up new possibilities. We organize a peer group of chief strategy officers of large multi-billion-dollar companies, and we get together and we talk about what are the trends that they are worried about. And these are the top trends that they're concerned about right now. These are probably your trends as well. Changes in customer preferences, digital transformation, the ability to provide greater personalization, substitutes, tech substitutes for your products or service, uncertainty around regulation, blockchain technologies, artificial intelligence with big data, distrust of large established brands, Internet of Things, purpose-driven businesses and the need and demand for that, and a labor shortage. And what COVID has done has simply accelerated these trends. So we are playing a new game. There are new possibilities, and we have this choice, therefore, is how are we going to play that game? Are we going to keep going over the high bar forward, or are we going to learn to go over backward? And there are 2 layers to this problem. The first is, how do you and your team come up with a 4th option? So I'm going to introduce you to a framework that you can use to help you and your team come up with a 4th option. And then, how do you get that idea through the organization out into the market? Again, I'm going to go very quickly, but you're going to have all of this content afterwards. So how do you generate 4th options? I have been, over the last 20 years, facilitating many strategic conversations, and I've developed a methodology that kind of addresses the 5 thinking habits that tend to lead us away from new 4th option ideas. And it spells ideas. First, imagine. Second, dissect. Then expand, then analyze, then sell. I forget who said this, but a philosopher said, all models are wrong, but some are useful. So I'm not saying this model is the truth, but I found this to be a very useful model for you to use to coach your people to think more innovatively. So let me go through each step very briefly. The first is imagine. Imagine is thinking like a great chess player, stepping forward in time, practicing mental time travel, envisioning checkmate, and then working backward from that. But most of our strategies are designed the way a person who doesn't know how to play chess plays chess, which is take the pieces forward and hope that I can get them into checkmate. I got a chance to interview Elon Musk soon after he launched SpaceX, and I asked him, why did he do that? And he explained to me, well, if we think about the future, in the future, humans will be interplanetary species. We can't get there because it costs too much to build and launch a rocket ship. When governments privatize the part of the space program that is building and launching rocket ships, the cost will go down, he thought, by as much as 90%. So he knows that the next step in the natural evolution is to build a company that's perfectly tailored to take that off of their hands. So that's the first step, is with your team stepping out 10 years from now and saying, What is checkmate look like? Next step is dissecting. Now, Julian talked about innovation not being just about product, and we tend to focus our innovation efforts around product. But it's when you expand where you innovate and start getting everyone across the business to innovate, that's where the magic happens. Apple didn't start scaling until 2002, 2003. Something changed in their approach. Amazon figured this out much earlier. If we take Amazon's revenue and Apple's revenue and make one the year of founding, you see Amazon scales much more quickly. And what Amazon does is it doesn't just focus on product. It focuses on pricing innovations, on physical experience innovations, and organizational innovations. And so there is an obvious place to look for innovations, but what we want to do is we want to allow people to explore around the product. One of our clients that we're working with is Raytheon. They're a large contractor, military contractor. They make missiles and spacesuits. They also make landing gears. And they had a problem, which was that they were not getting enough business in the aftermarket of landing gears. So an airline will buy an airplane that has their landing gear, but when they need to replace the landing gear, they'll go to a cheaper one. And so this group were thinking about how can we improve our market share of the aftermarket. And they were thinking about product innovations that might bring down the cost to make them more competitive. And they thought, well, we never think about the physical experience. I said, well, how is the physical experience relevant to selling landing gears? And they came up with a bunch of ideas that were, could we change the packaging to improve the physical experience of the mechanic so that the mechanic will then ask the purchasing manager to buy Raytheon's landing gears? And it opened up a whole bunch of interesting innovations. And so here's sort of a checklist that you might consider. I found it useful. Sort of a business model checklist. Where can we look for innovations? We can look at positioning. We can look at product. We can look at pricing models, placement or distribution in channels, look at promotion, marketing and sales, look at your processes and organization, look at your physical experience in spaces, and look at your people strategies. So these are 8 different types of innovation, and everyone in your organization fits into at least one of these. And so they have a role to play in innovating. So that's step 2, which is dissect. So you've chosen an uncommon area of the business to look for innovations, and then what we want to do is expand our option sets, create lots and lots of great options. And to understand how to do that well, we can learn a lot about that by studying great chess players. How does a great chess player look at a board and immediately see the winning move? This is Alexandra Kostanuik. When I interviewed her, she was a reigning women's world chess champion. And what she would do as a marketing stunt is challenge a whole town to play chess. She lines them up, and she'll go from one board to the next board to the next board. Each time she stops and she sees the winning move, and then when she's done with her round, she'll repeat. And she's going to win all of these games. And you could be sitting there for 20 minutes like this guy with this curly hair, looking at the board saying, what's Alexandra going to do? And you won't see it. And like that, she can see it. How does she see the option that we don't see? Well, research into expertise and expert performance gives us a very clear answer, which is you don't use logic. You use patterns. Master chess players recognize twice as many patterns as experts. Grandmasters recognize 10 times as many. So your team comes at the problem with a set of strategic patterns. Maybe it's disruption. Maybe it's blue ocean. Maybe it's resource-based competition. But they are missing maybe the pattern that allows them to see the option that others can't see. I believe there are 36 fundamental strategic patterns. And if you want to later, you can look at the list that what I'll give you. But what we find is that if you look at companies that are outperforming, so we take pairs of companies, same industry, similar size, one is outperforming the other, and you perform narrative analysis on how they describe their strategy, you'll see that the winning companies, the Googles, the Amazons, the Facebooks, they're using more strategic patterns to describe their strategy than the less successful ones. That helps you expand your options. Then after you've expanded the options, you have to decide what to choose. And so often, even if you come up with an innovative idea that really could be disruptive, so often we kill it off because it looks impossible. If the fourth option is going to make your competitors ignore and laugh at you, they will do so because it's impossible, or appears to be. And if they think it's impossible, it's likely that you and your team will also think it's impossible. So the trick is very simple, is you sort through your ideas and you take a few ideas that seem impossible, and take a tip from Albert Einstein, who said, it's not that I'm so smart, it's that I stay with problems longer. So an important thing to ask is there a space in your organization, in your culture, to sit a little bit longer than your competition with seemingly impossible ideas? The final step, I won't talk much about it, but sell. Successful internal innovators view the political challenge as part of the problem-solving process. So the selling challenge of getting internal buy-in and support for your idea is half of the innovation journey. And you want your people to learn to love it. So these 5 steps are what we can use to enable ourselves and our teams to generate more innovative, disruptive fourth option ideas. Which then brings us to the second half of the problem, which is how do we get those ideas through the organization? See, we often believe, and I think Julian alluded to this earlier, that the person that's going to come up with the fourth option that's going to disrupt the industry looks like this. If we look at lists of most innovative business people, these are the names that are repeated over and over and over again. What do you notice about them? They're all white. They're all men. They all got their idea in college. They all went to the mecca of innovation, Silicon Valley. They all then took a small team and went into a cave, a garage. This is the HP cave. They worked on their innovation, and then they took it out, and then they disrupted the old incumbents, the dinosaurs. So I wanted to see if this was really true. And I looked at a list similar to Julian's, but this is the 30 most transformative innovations of the last 30 years. I know you can't read this, and we're not going to go through this. I just want you to squint your eyes and look at the blue. The blue represent the innovations that were primarily driven by entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are the source of only 30% of society's most important innovations. It is really the employee inside the established company that's passionate about what is possible and pursues it from within. They are the innovators that have most impacted society. If it weren't for employee innovators, for entrepreneurs, you would not have the internet. If you had it, you couldn't connect it to your mobile phone. It wouldn't be a mobile phone. You couldn't send an email. If you got sick, you couldn't get an MRI. You couldn't get a stent. We would live in a radically inferior world if it weren't for employee innovators. And so I got inspired about how do we understand that journey of the internal innovator. And I met Jean. She works at Macmillan, which is one of the 4 largest publishing companies. And we do a lot of strategic facilitation in there. And she was working in a workshop of ours, and she came up with this idea. Long story short, it became this thing called Fierce Reads. And what it was, they were worried about self-published authors. They're people who write their own books, and they publish it themselves. If they're successful, Macmillan goes to them and says, we'd like to publish your next book. But increasingly, these self-published authors were saying, I don't know if I need a publisher. And so they created this platform for would-be self-published authors to put manuscripts on, and a community of readers that give them feedback on the manuscripts. And it became a hugely successful innovation. So what I did is I interviewed 150 Jeans, and I'm just going to very quickly summarize for you what I learned. There are 7 barriers. The first is intent. The next is need. The next is options, value blockers, taking action on the idea, building together a team, and managing the environment. Under intent, people, if they've lost the intent to innovate, they not only see opportunities and decide not to pursue them, they actually don't see opportunities. Fascinating study in the UK. They took a group of people who thought of themselves as lucky and people who thought of themselves as unlucky, and they gave them an assignment to count the number of photos in a newspaper. And the unlucky people took 6 minutes or so to count the numbers, but The lucky people found the answer in likely seconds because there was an advertisement that said in text, there are 60 photos in this newspaper, you can stop counting. When your people have the intent, they actually start seeing opportunities that they won't see if they've lost their intent. Second is they don't understand your strategy. Less than 55% of mid-level managers can name even 2 of a company's top strategic priorities. So you need to take your complex strategic plan and turn it into a simple statement of purpose. Third is options. They are not generating enough options. If you have a 1 in 10 chance of 100 times payoff, you got to take that bet every time, but you got to be ready to lose 9 times out of 10. The more ideas that you push through the system, the more likely you are to have success. The next is value blockers. This is the success rate of an innovation. If it is new to the company, so the customer is new to the company, and the technology is new to the company, you'd expect a failure rate of 75 to 90%. But if we can train our people to manage our business models, design interesting business models, we can start moving our innovations closer to the center where we have a much higher success rate. I think that Alex Osterwalder's work on business model design is quite impactful. So that will be another thing to bring into your companies. The next is, and I know that PASHA is doing this already, is allowing our people to experiment. Don't ask them to prove, build a plan, and then give them funding to execute. Allow them to take action and learn from that and build on that action. Now, we think of this as a new kind of Silicon Valley concept, but it's very old. Great companies have been doing this for decades. HP developed the first electronic calculator. The marketing firm told them there's no market for this because there was already an entrenched competitor, the slide rule, which was much cheaper. But what did they do? They experimented. They printed 100 of them, and 1,000 of them, and before long, they were selling 1,000 a day. Team is really fascinating. The innovations that were successful internally, they were not given permission by the boss to work together. It was actually a ground swelling of support. Like Gene sent out an email, said, I like this, I've got this idea. If you're interested in it, let's have pizza and talk about it. And 30 people showed up, and then they started working on their own time. The last thing I'll close with is environment. We're going to talk about culture next, right? But there are a bunch of environmental factors, internal environmental factors, your leadership, your talent, your organizational structure, and your culture. And most of our organizations are still designed like centrally planned economies, which cannot keep up with the current pace of change. But there are multiple forms by which you can organize your people. We do have hierarchies, but there are also marketplaces. There are also democracies. So at your board level, you kind of have a democracy. You have communities at home and communities at work, and you have ecosystems. And what we're seeing is some interesting experimentation happening by forward-looking companies that are exploring how to combine these things. Haier, for example, the Chinese conglomerate, Chinese appliance manufacturer, it took their company and broke it down to 4,000 micro enterprises, each with their own CEO. And even their support functions like finance and IT are separate P&Ls that have to sell their services internally. But let me just close by this. This is, if we look at, as companies unlock these barriers to internal innovation, an exciting new form of the organization appears. Intent. We're no longer going to have employees. You need to treat your people like entrepreneurs. Need, no more complex plans, simple statements of purpose that everyone can understand. Options come from not from boardrooms, but from hallways, new ideas. Value blockers, not having one business model, but having multiple business models. Taking action on your idea, being allowed to take action on an idea rather than asking people for a business plan. Moving from hierarchies to small, agile teams, and ultimately the company evolves from a centrally planned model to an ecosystem in which your people have the freedom to see opportunities, rally the resources to seize them. And what's going to happen? They're going to laugh at you. You're going to start unlocking these innovations across the business model, and you're going to put your slowest horses first. And everyone will laugh at you because all of the prince's fastest horses are going to beat your slowest horses. But in the next heat, you're going to play your medium horses. Your fastest horses. And the prince has already run his fastest horses. So he's going to put his medium horses in. And your fastest horses are just fast enough to beat the prince's medium horses. And in the third heat, your medium horses beat the prince's slowest horses. And for the first time ever, the general wins. So this QR code gives you, I know I went through it very quickly, this QR code gives you a copy of the presentation, online courses, workbooks, everything free for you. Thank you very much.